All right, here we are. I am here with, okay, I'm going to say it. Let's see if I get it right. Nope, Paweł
Yes.
Zubkiewicz.
Yes. Hi.
All right,
Hi,
now,
Eric.
are you just being nice? Now you say it and see how close I came.
Very good for American person, to be
Okay.
honest.
All right, now I'm going to teach you how to say my name. It is Eric
Okay,
Johnson.
Eric.
Eric, you're doing great.
Thank you.
Or anyway, no. Hey, Pavel, super excited to have you here. Today we're going to be talking about, and super excited to have everybody else here as well. If you get a chance, throw into the chat where you're watching from. I always love to see that. And today we're going to be talking about testing. Testing is a big deal. More specifically, testing in serverless, right? So this testing with Pavel here. Tell us who you are, what you do, and why this is important to you.
All right, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me to serverless office hours and giving me audience to share how I test serverless applications, because that was really important for me when I was thinking and designing this approach or this solution, because this is ready to use way of setting up the application or the application project. But who I am, so I've started like 18 years ago in the IT industry. I used to work as a developer, business analyst, architect. And in 2016, I decided that I want to learn about the cloud, and I decided that AWS is the best. I still think that it is the best. So from the very beginning, I started using serverless because I was lured by its like low cost. I was at the very beginning, I was designing some kind of site startup application, something like that, and costs were really important for me. And since then, I designed it and built like a lot of different complex systems, both serverless and classic architectures. And even before cloud, I was always involved with the local community. I started as a Java developer, so I used to, organize the JAG meetup in my city, and my commitment to the community also moved with cloud. So I started my blog that was dedicated to the serverless architecture. I think I was the first person in Poland talking about serverless in AWS. I started a newsletter. I started doing some kind of, webinars, going on the conferences and talking about it. And later on, I joined the AWS Community Builders. And in 2022, I was awarded the prestigious title of Serverless Hero. Yeah, and I'm proud of it. Yeah.
Were you the first one in Poland as well for the Serverless Hero?
No. Actually, we have a lot of heroes in Poland, so we are very.
Well, the serverless heroes?
Strong. Yes, serverless hero. Okay. I was the first serverless hero in Poland, and besides serverless, I also focus on cost optimization in AWS Cloud. I am a founder of CloudPunch application, which automates the ways of finding the potential savings in your AWS environments. And, I live in Wrocław, in Poland, with my wife and my dog. In our free time, we love to travel around the world. And I also enjoy riding my enduro bike in mountains.
Nice. All right. Well, that's all out there. That's cool. Yeah, super glad to have you as a hero. So testing. All right. So, folks it's really funny when I have conversations with people about testing. It's like, well, how do you test in service? And I love this side. I mean, you've kind of said this, or at least in the show explanation, was saying you can test serverless much like you test other things. Now, when serverless came out, I'll say this real quick and then I'll pass to you, but when Serverless came out, obviously it's not just, we think, it's moving from Java to Node or something like that. It's not a language change. It's a way to think change, right? I mean, it's the way it changes the way we think. It moves us to event-driven architecture. It moves us to different ways of doing this. But you can still test serverless. Do you agree with that statement, or?
Yes, you can, but this is not that simple. And we are already jumping to the very heart of it. So
getting in the meat of it,
yeah. I think I have a slide about it because I prepared a few slides. So if
I'm going to bring up your. Are you ready for me to bring up your slides?
And
all right.
Yes.
All right.
So first of all, even when I was writing monolith Java applications, and back then, it was before 2010, no one was saying this is monolith because microservices were not popular in the mainstream. So even back then, writing tests was hard. No one wanted to do it, etc. So that was a struggle even before serverless. But in serverless, it's even more hard to test because we don't, as users, as developers, we don't control everything, because I would say half of the serverless application is infrastructure, like queues, like event bridge, etc. And we cannot log into it or design it in a somewhat strange way. Of course, we can mock everything or we can emulate everything, but I don't like those approaches. So this is hard for people to test because this is sometimes a challenge, because even if you want to test, you have to design those tests in a different way in comparison to the previous settings like monolith Java applications, for example. And also the third thing, because of a lot of those infrastructural elements, the code that we write in Lambda functions often doesn't make sense without interactions with those resources that are provisioned in a cloud. So this is additional problem for many people. And, because of this last element, I really think that the best way to test is to create resources in the cloud, but execute your tests locally or on integration server, like a continuous integration server. So I will show that in a moment later when we will have a code. But just in summary, to wrap it, I think you can test, and also you should test, because whenever I'm lazy and I'm starting really minimal project, sometimes a single Lambda function, because I want to, integrate two things together, and I think, okay, I know how to do it, I will not write tests, it will be faster. I always end up writing tests because it's never that easy. So this is
I always go the other route. I won't write it, and then it fails in production. So yes, I agree with that.
Yeah. Also, I used to be a Java programmer, but when I switched to AWS and serverless, I fell in love with JavaScript. And JavaScript doesn't have explicit types. So whenever you want to refactor your code, this is a rather hard thing comparing to the Java language. So having tests is the only thing that allows you to rewrite the code and make sure after you execute the tests that your application behaves in the same way. So this is necessary because you don't have a compiler, right? So that's also very helpful when you are using language like script language, right?
Right. All right. Okay, so you've got some other concepts you're going to talk about real quick, right, before we jump into code. And just so y'all know, we're going to show he's got some things we're going to talk through, kind of make sure we're talking about the same thing, terminology, things like that. And then we're going to code. Pavel's going to show us some examples of testing. So definitely jump in there. So why should we even listen to you? Here we go.
Okay. All right. So actually, what's really interesting, it's already 4 years ago. It's already 4 years since I created this, and I was thinking like for a few weeks how to test my application, serverless application, in a way that is for me like good enough. And by good enough, I mean it is automated and it doesn't require me to put in the implementation code some like strange hacks or like if switches that can do different things depending whether this code runs in a cloud, in a production, or it is under testing. I don't like this type of things. So I wanted the solution that it will be really easy to use without even thinking about, how to set it up. And it took me like, I think 4, maybe 6 weeks altogether to put this setup. And I used already existing tools that are open source. I just like put the configuration and I imagined how everything can work from the very beginning to the end. So this is the serverless hexagonal template, and you can use it. It's open source under this URL. And also, Eric, please paste it on the chat so everyone can access it.
I've already posted it to everybody.
Okay,
It should be on all channels.
So this is something that everyone can use as a scaffolding for the new projects. I use it many times for different projects that I built for my personal purpose and also at work for my clients. And this template also shows you how to write different types of tests, and we'll focus today on the testing aspect. So when you will go to the GitHub, this is just a print screen because I don't want to leave VS Code environment. In the section Quick Start, you will see this comment here. And this comment allows you, when you have installed serverless framework, to create your own project from this template. So right now I have only slides here, so images, and this text file with the comments. So this is this comment, SLS create, and here is the URL to the GitHub to this template. And the name of the project is SLS Office for right now. So I will just copy it and execute. And right now, serverless framework is fetching this this project from GitHub, already did, and created the folder here with this project. And this project is highly opinionated. Of course, it is in JavaScript. It is using serverless framework version 3. However, I wanted to mention that the concept of testing, I think it's universal, and you can apply this methodology even if you are using different tools to deploy. However, I haven't created like the analogy for Terraform or CDK. So I don't know the specific tools for different, tools. But the principle, I think, is universal. So this is using the serverless framework. It has been created. So what we need to do next, we need to go into this folder and install JavaScript dependencies. This will take a few seconds.
And while that's doing that, I'm going to bring up some comments here real quick here. So we have, so Daniel asks, if I use this template, can I deploy my business logic in Lambda or ECR or EKS?
No, this is only for Lambda functions.
Okay. Yep. But Daniel's he's actually one of an Amazonian. He's very smart. I know he can convert that. Daniel, convert it for us. You can build it out on containers, ECR, EKS. So, and then Alper Codes he did ask about the SAM version of the template. And obviously you've already answered that, but it was kind of funny. I just took and threw that into Q, or actually I like Claude, so I have my own Claude, and asked it to convert the serverless template to like CDK, and it was able to do it. Probably some changes, but yeah, you know, in the world of LLMs, it wouldn't be a hard thing to change over. So, but again, I think the principles here of testing are what we're driving at, and I think this is universal.
There is one thing that I will show it later. There is a specific plugin for serverless framework, and I guess that this is a rather easy thing. And if that solution doesn't exist in, you know, CDK tools or other like Terraform tools, you can always write it on your own. But the rest should be there. And, you know, for tests, I'm just using Jest Node framework for testing.
Standard libraries. Yep. Okay.
Yes, standard libraries. So, okay, we created the template. As you can see here, there is a lot of different files and installed node dependencies. So now let's deploy this into the cloud. It haven't been deployed like right now. So this is the first deploy, and already interesting thing. So it is using the dev-Paweł. Paweł is my name, and this is also the username on this computer. So this is something that I written because very often teams just share single dev AWS account when they are working. And to avoid clash of names and, you know, resources, or basically, you know, clashing with your colleagues, I implemented this. So on a single AWS account in the same region, multiple people can work together, unless, you know, until they have different names or usernames on computers. So this is actually really simple thing to do. That's the whole thing, that, you know, uses the user info username and overloads the stage name. So this is something that I added, and I think this is useful and worth knowing. And right now we have CloudFormation stack being deployed. So this is like another 30 seconds. So,
all right. So, I have a question for you. So we talk about, and I may be jumping ahead, Pavel. So, you know, you can go, hey, we'll get to it later. But it's, you know, I have been talking about testing and debugging, things like that, not to the degree that you do, as far as mine's more of, you know, sanity checks. Is this working? And I've for a long time, I've been a proponent or in favor of get to the cloud as soon as possible. And I still think that's the best place to test, much like you were saying earlier. Get to the cloud because the other resources and things like that. Is there any time when you stay local? When you
actually,
say,
no.
you know what, I can test this local, or if you have to do local tests, how do you approach that? And if you want to say, hey, we'll answer that in a minute, that's fine.
I don't have Docker installed on my computer. I have it like for 2 hours in my whole life. So I don't test it and locally, but maybe I could just mention how I used to test before I created this setup. So there was something called Serverless Offline. That was a plugin that allowed you to locally test your API gateway configuration. Basically, it was starting locally on your computer, the HTTP server, and expose the endpoints to your code locally. So you could use like, you know, CURL or Postman or any other thing that is allowing you to shoot the HTTP requests to test your application. But I didn't like it because this is semi-automatic, semi-manual testing. So I used it, but I wasn't happy with it. And before having this solution that I'm showing today, I had this cycle, and actually I have a slide for it. So where is this bad cycle? Yeah. So probably a lot of you knows this cycle. You write code, you deploy to the cloud, you invoke a Lambda function, either manually in a web console or by using some CLI, and it fails. Then you check the logs in CloudWatch and repeat and repeat and repeat. And after several iterations, you have code that works, or at least you haven't tested it pretty well, but it in general it works. But this is, time consuming. And at some point I was really fed up with how it works, because CloudFormation is pretty slow, let's be honest, and say it like
it is not. No. I remember going, just deploy. Yes, it is. It's not. Yeah, it's faster. It's faster than when we started, but yeah.
Yeah, but okay. Let's not go into this. It should be faster.
No. I agree with you. That wasn't an argument. I was playing.
And one of the things that I deliver in this setup is that you can forget about this cycle. There is one exception when you are testing IAM privileges, because you need to change the Lambda IAM role in cloud. So whenever you are changing the role, you need to redeploy it. But the rest of the code can be tested locally using integration tests. And by tested locally, I mean that your code is executed locally, but it connects to the resources in the cloud. For example, if you have a piece of code that is interacting with DynamoDB, DynamoDB is not emulated on your computer, but it is created in the cloud. If you are, interacting with Athena, the same thing. You are creating Athena in a cloud, and you are interacting with it from your code. And actually, I mentioned Athena because that was the first application which I was writing like 4 years ago. And I decided, okay, this is terrible, because for Athena, I needed 20 different privileges. And I was so fed up, finding those privileges back then.
Sure.
ChatGPT wouldn't give you that. So I decided to change the way how those tests are done. So this is something that I want to avoid. And I don't test locally anything unless this is unit test. And unit tests are basically only for business logic and for utils methods, converting date, format, etc., things like that.
Okay.
So that's it. Let's take a look at here. Okay, the service was deployed. So this is the name of the service with this with my name here. It has single endpoint. Oh, okay, I will just show you what we are deploying. That will be easier. So this is the architecture of this simple application. It has a API endpoint. And when you are sending the post request to it, then the message is sent to the Lambda service, and this Lambda service is creating item in DynamoDB. Later on, by DynamoDB streams, and I want to highlight in asynchronous way, another Lambda function is triggered, and this Lambda function is doing something with the item that was just created by this first Lambda. So this is pretty simple setup, but we already have a lot of things that can go wrong in here. And also something that is a challenge for many people still, like how would you test asynchronous invocation?
Yeah.
So I also have a solution for this. However, I told you before that I wanted a solution that is easy to use. And one aspect of easy to use is that I don't need to think about specific IDs. So here we have endpoint with the unique name. It was just created for me. And what I wanted to avoid, and I succeed, is that I don't need to copy this ID and put it in a test anywhere. I just execute the test. And I executed this command npm run all. And right now what will happen, we will have 3 different sets of tests being executed. Here we have unit tests. Those tests don't require cloud to be present. So there is test for business logic and there is test for my entity. So this is like a class that encapsulates the object. Next, we have tests that are named integration tests. And there is an error, but this error is expected. I will explain it later. So we have tests for different, I don't want to use the word entity again, different types of objects in hexagonal architecture. So we have adapters, we have services, and for each of this thing, we have separate tests. We also have integration tests for the whole Lambda function or handler function. And those tests have .ent extension. MJS is just the newer JavaScript,
Right.
like modern JavaScript, right? And at the later on, we have those tests. They took 18 seconds. I will talk about it maybe a little bit later, what happens there. And at the very end, we have end-to-end tests. And this end-to-end test is actually what is testing the whole process. Like this is like a client. Client is sending a request, and this is a black box test. We don't know what's happening inside of AWS. The whole process is triggered, but at the end, I'm checking if the whole process was a success or not. Okay. At this point, I just want to highlight that without, looking at concrete IDs of resources, what was created or anything, all the tests passed. So basically, I just created the project, installed the dependencies, deployed it, and execute all the tests. It was simple as that. And for me, this is already good. Okay, of course, I'm not maybe objective, but that was one of the things that
but this is a step,
to achieve.
I think half the battle, obviously, when you're doing, and this is something I was going to say earlier, when we set it, or when we talk about testing, right? We talk about testing for running serverless, doesn't matter. So, serverless, non-serverless, doesn't matter. Code, right? So many times it is, okay, everything, I have the whole application built. Now I'm going to write my test coverage. It's like, well, had I done that up front, like the test driven or there's obviously philosophies around it, but had I done that up front, had I thought about testing from the start, it would have saved me a lot of time. And so I think this idea of saying, okay, from the very beginning, we're going to start with the boilerplate that builds our tests in. I love this. I mean, it's brilliant.
Exactly. So we don't have a time to discuss the hexagonal architecture, right. But when you are using the principles in this setup, you design up front. So you're creating the design like I'm showing right now. And you already know that this Lambda function will need a piece of code that is connecting to the DynamoDB table. And because you are following the principles of hexagonal architecture, in the source folder, you will have adapters for DynamoDB. And this is the code that is interacting with, DynamoDB. Nothing fancy here. This is really simple stuff, right? But also you will have services. And what's the difference between them? Like, adapter is just a technical class, or I'm using classes in JavaScript, but it really doesn't matter. Adapter is just some code that is not aware of business logic or any business concepts. However, the service is aware of the business of your application, and it is using the adapter. So that's because, hexagonal architecture is also named ports and adapters. So you can always switch the DynamoDB adapter to some other thing. Maybe that wouldn't be that easy and straightforward, but in general, it is good design approach to making your code loosely coupled and easy to extend or replace. And
there you go, Daniel. That's how you switch. That's how you switch from Lambda out to ECS. I'm sorry, ECS or Kubernetes. Is you do it based on this, based on the adapters. So
yeah. And because you have several, physical files, let me say it like that, with the code, you can test each file in separation. So I have the separate tests for DynamoDB adapter, and I have separate tests for service. So they are called named integration tests because there's like this principle that the naming convention was is very old, I guess. So we have unit test, we have integration test, and we have end-to-end tests. And those integration tests, they are executed against the real resources. So for example, here we have reference to the process environment environment variable named table name. And this variable is defined as a Lambda environment variable. And what I am using here is something named export env. This is the plugin to the serverless framework that is during the execution of tests, at the very beginning of execution of tests, is connecting to the cloud and is getting all of the environment variables from the Lambda function. And it is saving all of those environment variables in a local file. And
so it's actually calling after it's deployed, it's calling the service and grabbing all the variables.
Yes. Then those variables are available to the Jest testing library. They are injected in Jest. And that means that those unique IDs can be fetched from the cloud and used locally. That's why I didn't have to copy the ID of the endpoint, because it was injected into my environment. Yeah, and this file is named .aws-env, and you can see there is a stage, there's a region, there is service name, there is this endpoint, table name. So this is the name of DynamoDB table, and some hello world message, just for fun. So that was actually, when I was creating everything, that was the most important part, because it allowed me to join different pieces together and create the fully automated cycle. So those, of course, you need to remember to put those elements in the Lambda function environment variables. But you usually do this. So this is not like an additional step just for sake of testing. That's the how Java application, sorry, how serverless applications are written, at least in my opinion. So this is something that is really important. When you have this file, you need to inject it into just context. Let me say it like that. By just context, I mean when you are executing the test using just has some kind of memory, and you need to insert those variables into memory. So whenever there is this process, that env, that name of the variable, it is resolved to the actionable value, and it is resolved because here we are just referencing to this file, and that's a magic right here. And here are also this additional extensions. So I just created 3 different extensions because I want to group my tests depending whether they are unit, they are integration, or end-to-end. Why? Because usually unit tests are not that important. Of course, they are important from the perspective of the business logic, but later on, the biggest amount of problems are integration problems. And now I guess this is the time for another slide. So
would you say that's specific to serverless or in general?
I would say that this is specific to serverless. Why?
Okay.
Because in serverless, we have much more infrastructure than in, I don't know, Kubernetes or ordinary server with Java server on it running Java enterprise application. And also I call this like serverless architecture and classic architecture. Everything which is not serverless or cloud native, for me, it's classic. So in serverless or cloud native architecture, infrastructure also can fulfill business logic. For example, if you have event bridge and you have different rules, those rules are basically implementing business logic. Like, I don't know, when new user joins your company, do something. This is business logic, right? So in serverless, this is even maybe harder because infrastructure, implements business logic. In other architectures, that's not the case because only code implements logic. That's the simplification, maybe, but let's think like this. So here is some on the slide. There are some potential problems which can happen. So those at the top, those are things that we can test using unit tests. Like we can test if input validation works okay, if the format of the message is okay, of course, business logic. We can also test the entities that we save to the database. And the green ones, those are the problems that can happen because of the misconfiguration of the infrastructure. Like, for example, this Lambda function may try to write to the different DynamoDB table, or maybe it wants to write to the correct DynamoDB table, but it doesn't have privileges. Maybe this SQS is triggering the wrong Lambda function. Maybe this Lambda function is, sending the message in the wrong format or something else. So there is a lot of things that can go wrong, and those things are basically not the whole Lambda, but some part of the Lambda code plus some resource in the cloud. And they work together, and there is something that needs to be tested to be sure that it works fine. And here is the explanation what I mean by different types of tests.
Yeah.
So here in the middle, there are unit tests, and unit tests only test the code alone. As I said, like util methods, business logic, maybe some logic in the entity, things like that. Then you have integration tests. And integration test is basically, as I said, some resource in a cloud and some parts of the code. And by parts of the code, I mean like we are not testing the whole Lambda function. We are testing, for example, I will just open the test. We are testing DynamoDB adapter to be sure that, method like create entity works okay, or delete works okay, etc. Or like when you want to get element, you need to test it. So things like that. In service is even more important, because, for example, adapter methods, maybe you can just copy it from the old project because you already written that. But the service is just, again, business use of the adapter. So you always write the service as a new file because you are implementing new thing in the new project, right? So you are writing tests that are testing just a piece of code in integration with the resource. And at the very end, we have end-to-end tests. And those end-to-end tests, they can take many seconds, sometimes maybe minutes, depending on what we are testing in AWS. Why so long? Because of asynchronous integrations and other things that may happen. Sometimes, I don't know, queue goes faster. Sometimes something happens and message is not visible for a little bit of time. So we need to expect that end-to-end tests will run longer. But that's not the problem. We are writing end-to-end test as a last thing that gives us a lot of confidence that the whole service works as we intended. However, what's most important for us is integration tests, because they are allowing us to write code without constant redeployment. So I was showing you this bad cycle of deploy. Now, when you write code, you can execute that code locally against, like, Amazon DynamoDB in the cloud. And when there is an error in a code, you just change the code and trigger the test again without any deployments. So this is super fast. Like, I mean, as fast as you can write, or using ChatGPT or the other AI nowadays, right? So maybe I will show you this. So you can, instead of executing all tests, you can execute like only integration tests.
Now these are running in the cloud.
Yes. Well, yes and no. The code is executed locally.
Gotcha, but you're calling the service. Okay, gotcha.
Yes.
Okay. All
yes,
right.
They are. And
so I'm going to explain that real quick on, and because I think some people get hung up on this, and I use SAM, but it's the same effect. Basically, what's happening, and then we've got some questions that I'm going to jump onto here real quick, and we'll make sure time wise we hit that. Basically, what's happening is you're using a role locally, or a user, depends on how you set it up. Preferably role, but you're using a role locally that has access to call DynamoDB. So basically, the Lambda function can call DynamoDB. It can call any of the services. So any services that DynamoDB is going to interact with, you can run. You can have that role locally to talk to these. So that's why that code can run locally, but you don't have to emulate. And I've seen folks, and I'm guilty of it. try to run DynamoDB locally, or the DynamoDB local. Then I can't for the life of me figure out Docker containers, or I'm sorry, Docker network. And then I sit and wonder, is it the emulator, or is it, what's wrong with this? And so you run into that. Now, there was a question earlier, and I'm wondering about your take on this. Have you ever thought about using oh, here it is. I'm just gonna pull it up. Local stack.
So I wasn't thinking about it because I was reading a lot of what Jan Shui was saying and teaching people, and he also, at least back then, was saying that the local stack is not the best option. Also, local stack is like this nowadays popular setup, so a little bit open source and a little bit commercial. So I said that the first project that I used as the testing ground for it was using Athena, and Athena was not available in a free local stack, and I didn't want to pay for it, so I didn't want to use it. Also, all my years of experience as a Java programmer, there was always this saying that it works on my computer. I think that the simpler the setup on your computer, the better. And like configuring Docker and other things, I guess that's not for me. A lot of things can happen. So only thing that I have on this computer is the configured, profile for AWS and Node version 20. And of course, Serverless framework. So we could start at the creation of the new project from the template. So the separate thing. So sorry, Eric, because you said about the role, and actually there are two types of tests. So when I'm testing the adapter, I am using my role. You can see at the bottom of my screen, you see that the profile is default. So this is my profile, and I have like huge privileges, and I can create different resources, and this profile is used to deploy the whole application to my AWS account. However, I have those classes, and I'm not proud about the naming convention, but I didn't have a better idea. It starts with IAM-process item-myentity service. What does it mean? This means that I am testing IAM role in the context of process item Lambda function, and I'm testing this service. So basically, this test is assuming the Lambda role for the process item and trying to do different things just to test it. And let's open it, and let's see what's happening here. In the very beginning, I written this. This is a helper library that allows me to assume the role by name of the Lambda function. It is written in a way that it is really easy to use, and underneath it is like resolving the whole naming convention that is used by Serverless framework. So this is really well. At the beginning, I said that I spent like 4 to 6 weeks to design everything, and I guess if that was 6 weeks, I spent 4 weeks on writing this test helper, because this is really, at least it was for me, really hard to like juggle with those different roles, etc. Now it is also rewritten to the version 3 of AWS SDK. Back then I implemented it for the version 2. So at the beginning of this test, it is assuming the Lambda role for this create item Lambda function. And after all the tests are executed, it is leaving this role. So basically I am assuming again my default role on my computer. And what I'm doing here, I'm just doing the cleanup. So whenever I'm running a test, new items are added to the DynamoDB. And I am, after all the tests passed, I'm deleting all those items. So the test is cleaning after itself. And why I'm doing this? Because the create item cannot delete items, because we are using the least privilege principle. And I will just show it to you. So we have definition of the Lambda function in a serverless framework. And this is the definition. I can only put item or update item. You remember I told you that this error is expected. Yes, this error is expected because the logging level is set to the error. So the error is logged to the console. And at the very end, we are seeing here in this file on line 34. So my entity service, line 34. Let's go here. This is this file. Sorry, this is the other Lambda function, process item. Right here, it's process item. Oh yeah, this is it. So the process item cannot create the item because it is processing the item from DynamoDB stream. That's why here I'm using the try and I'm catching the error. And the logging is from the adapter. So that's it. And I will just show again the slide. So Lambda here, create item, can create items, but process item, it actually doesn't need any access to DynamoDB. It is using the DynamoDB stream.
It's getting triggered from the
So yeah, that was the hardest part of writing this jungling with the roles and leaving them. Like assuming role is maybe easy, but leaving it in a context of the just execution, it's really hard. But now what can you do? Because I cannot do it because I would have to start writing the code and we don't have a time for it. But you can write JavaScript serverless applications here using principles of test-driven development, even for IAM roles. So you can assume the role and see if your code will work okay or your role is well defined. Of course, if you allow it to do everything, it doesn't make sense, but obviously you shouldn't put any stars in the IAM. And this is the only situation when you need to do the redeploy, because the IAM role needs to be changed. So that's the problem. And we have like 8 minutes. One more thing.
Well, I'm actually going to stop you for a second. I want to get started. There was a lot of stuff going on while you were talking. So I have a couple questions I want to jump in real quick here, and then I'm going to throw out a couple things. One, and just as far as Yan Shui, I always say his name wrong. He actually looking at looks like V3. He does say this is looking pretty amazing. I agree with you in that I try to get to the cloud as fast as I can, but sometimes that local, developers want local. So this is definitely a viable action. We do have a question coming in for you. It says, do you have multiple different roles for E2E and production? Since if something fails locally due to permissions missing, is not necessary to fail in production if it has permissions. Does that make sense to you?
Okay, so that's why I am testing those IAM roles. So I'm sure that deployed application will work. Because when I was creating this setup, at the very beginning, I wasn't thinking about testing IAM roles. And I was so happy that all my tests are working fine. I deployed the application and end-to-end test failed. After debugging, I noticed that it failed because one of the Lambda functions didn't have proper IAM permissions. That's why there are those those tests that start with IAM. Again, terrible naming convention. If someone could suggest better, I will welcome the suggestions. But this is basically, this doesn't happen. If you have those tests that test using Lambda role, then it will not happen. What was in the question?
Okay, alrighty. The other question, and then I want to give you a moment to do the async because I think that's really interesting. The end-to-end is how do you make sure to have, I believe, consistency is what the word there over these roles. Just by swapping them in and out as you're running, or
I think I don't understand the question, but maybe this is because someone who is asking maybe is not using serverless that much. Those IAM roles are defined here for each Lambda function. Each Lambda function has a separate role. I am using this serverless IAM roles per function. This is the best practice. Each Lambda role should have a separate IAM role. So those roles are just defined for Lambda functions. So either please explain in a different way, or I just don't understand.
He understood. He follows now. He got it. Yeah. So you're maintaining those in the templates and deploy them as a change. That keeps the consistency. He's up to speed.
Yeah.
All right. We only have about 4 minutes.
I am not changing those roles manually.
Yeah. All right, we only have about 4 minutes and we need to duck out, but I'd love to see your quick explanation, at least just even in the slide or on the end-to-end. Sorry to rush you. No, sometimes we have flexibility today. They're still right after us. So.
Okay, so I have a slide, so I really want to tell about it. So there is this library, which is basically an extension to Jest testing framework, which is called AWS Testing Library. And it has several methods that allow you to do some specific things for different services in AWS. And in this setup, in the middle, we have DynamoDB Stream. This is exactly the same application that I showed you before, but in vertical diagram. Right. So I am locally executing the test, and this test is triggering regular HTTP request to API gateway, like any client would, and the whole process is triggering. And at the end, this locally executed test on my computer is waiting for some particular message to appear in a CloudWatch logs of this Lambda function. And here I'm waiting for a message that is at the very bottom here, processing item and this item ID. So this method allows us to wait for 25 seconds. And I mentioned before that end-to-end tests can take a lot. Like 25 seconds, it's not the longest. Sometimes I'm setting like even longer timeouts. And it is like waiting for the log to appear in CloudWatch with this particular message. And of course, this is a little bit, I don't know the proper English name for this, really small hack, because maybe not always you would like to put in your Lambda code information that I am processing item and ID. Maybe you don't want to log it, but that's the hack that allows you to test in an asynchronous way the whole process. So this is something like this. And also maybe something which is not very obvious to everyone, but what you can do, you can just use the regular fetch to trigger your Lambda function. So you have this base URL. Base URL looks like this. It uses those environments that are fetched to the .awsn file. So that file, right?
Yeah.
And then you are sending the regular message and waiting for this log to appear. That's something like that. Other way to doing this, and basically I
Pavel,
cannot explain it longer, but
yeah, I hate to do this, but we have to ditch out. It's we have someone coming up, so but we're gonna have to do this. We're gonna have to do this again. Yeah, we have Becoming Awesome starting right after this, so we're gonna bow out now and pass it on to them. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Thank you, Pavel, and I'm gonna need to end it. I'm sorry to be so abrupt.